You wake up to the clang of bells from the chapel tower, a dull iron groan that rattles your bones before dawn has even stretched its fingers across the sky. Your straw mattress has left you itching. Your cloak smells faintly of wood smoke and last night's spilled ale, and outside your chamber the castle is already buzzing. Not with the sounds of birds or cheerful market chatter. No, what drifts through these stone halls is juicier. Servants are whispering. Ladies in waiting are trading glances. Pages scurry like mice, half eager, half afraid, because they've heard a rumour about the Queen. And if you know one thing about medieval courts, it's this. Gossip is more nourishing than bread, more intoxicating than wine, and twice as dangerous as poison. Before you've even rubbed the sleep from your eyes, the whispers curl around you like smoke. A queen plotting against her husband, a mistress hidden behind a tapestry, a nobleman who's just a little too close to the king. And you? You're not just a bystander. You're here at the long table, spoon in hand, pretending you came for the barley loaf, when really, you came for the drama. So today, we're stepping into a full medieval day in the life. From sunrise to candle out, you'll hear the rumours that toppled kings, ruined marriages, and sent people to the stake. Think of it as a royal reality show, minus the confessional booth, but with double the poison. And before we plunge in, yes, this is the part where I remind you, if you love a good scandal told by firelight, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Because if you think the Tudors were messy, just wait until you see what their ancestors were doing before breakfast. And let me know in the comments what's your favourite thing about medieval ages. Mine are all the gossip and mind games. Get comfortable, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle into the great hall, its air thick with smoke and the sour tang of bodies packed too close together. The fire in the hearth crackles with damp wood. Above you, tapestries sway slightly in the draught, their thread showing battles, saints, and, if you look closely, moth holes. The smell hits you first. Barley bread toasted over embers, weak ale sloshed into wooden cups, a hint of onions from last night's stew reheated for anyone who dares. At the high table, the Queen sits stiffly, her back ramrod straight, her eyes fixed on her husband like she's debating whether to bless him or bludgeon him. Meet Eleanor of Aquitaine. Not just any queen, mind you. This is the woman who once scandalized Europe by divorcing one king, marrying his rival, and giving birth to enough children to populate a small army. Eleanor doesn't just live history, she rewrites it in her own furious handwriting. Right now, she's glaring at her husband, King Louis VII of France. Louis, bless him, is pious to the point of boredom, the sort of man who can pray through dinner and fall asleep mid-conversation about theology. Eleanor. She wants adventure, power, and a partner who doesn't think romance is fasting together on Fridays. The whispers are merciless. Some say she grew too close to Geoffrey Plantagenet, her husband's father-in-law. Others claim she flirted shamelessly with knights during the Crusades, her beauty shining brighter than the Holy Sepulchre itself. Whether true or not, the rumours spread like wildfire, and in a medieval court, reputation is worth more than land. As you tear off a hunk of bread, you catch servants muttering just loudly enough to be overheard. She told Louis she wanted an annulment, said their marriage was cursed because they only had daughters. Another pipes up, eyes wide. Daughters! Imagine tossing aside a queen because she didn't give you a boy. But Louis, ever obedient, agreed. Big mistake. Within weeks, Eleanor slipped the royal ring from her finger, shook the French dust off her hem, and married Henry Plantagenet, soon to become Henry II of England. And with that single move, France lost half its territory. Louis had essentially handed his rival not just a brilliant woman, but an empire. And you thought your ex moving on too quickly was bad. At least yours didn't redraw the map of Europe out of spite. You glanced down at your plate. Well, plate is generous. More like a trencher, a chunk of yesterday's bread hollowed out to hold food until it soaks up the grease. Breakfast in the Middle Ages isn't the glamorous banquet you might picture. It's barley bread, a hunk of cheese if you're lucky, maybe some dried meat. Nobles might get spiced wine on feast days, but for the everyday courtier, it's weak ale and whatever didn't rot overnight. And yet, the great hall is buzzing louder than the hearth. Why? Because mealtime is the perfect cover for gossip. Everyone sits shoulder to shoulder, half asleep, half hungry, and fully alert to who's glaring at whom. Seating arrangements are a political statement. Too close to the Queen, and people assume you're her favourite. Too far down the table, and you may as well be invisible. The food might be bland, but the scandal, piping hot. By the time the bread is gone and the ale cups drained, the conversation shifts across the channel. Eleanor's remarriage to Henry II of England was supposed to be her victory lap. She gave him sons, plenty of them, and together they stitched together a vast Angevin empire. But Henry had a weakness, or, depending on your point of view, a strength. He liked women. Enter Rosamund Clifford, known to history as Fair Rosamund. Blonde, radiant, hidden away in a secret bower that could only be reached by a maze of twisting paths, she became Henry's cherished mistress. Court poets sighed over her. Chroniclers described her as a jewel tucked away in the English countryside. The king adored her. The queen, unsurprisingly, did not. The rumours blaze like the fire in the hearth. Did you hear? Eleanor found Rosamund in her secret garden. One servant leans closer, whispering with relish. She forced her to choose, dagger or poison. Gasps ripple down the table. Another shakes his head solemnly. Nay, she died of illness later. The Queen never touched her. History never settled the matter, but the legend was too good to ignore. Eleanor storming into the labyrinth, torch in hand, eyes burning with fury, confronting the mistress her husband hid away. It's the kind of story that made even the dullest monk pick up his quill. Did Eleanor actually poison her? Probably not. But in the court of public opinion, the image of the furious queen with a vial of poison was far too delicious to pass up. And while Rosamund's fate may have been sealed by fever, her memory became immortal as the woman who dared to rival Eleanor of Aquitaine, and paid the ultimate price. A quick pause here. Do you know what's fascinating? That secret bower of Rosamund's. Chroniclers describe it as a maze of paths, a labyrinth designed to keep intruders away. To the medieval imagination, it was almost mythic. The king's mistress, hidden in a garden of roses, accessible only by those who knew the secret way. Of course, the idea of a labyrinth wasn't new. Ancient myths loved them. But by planting Rosamond there, chroniclers turned her into a living legend. It's like saying, yes, he had a mistress, but she was so special. She needed her own enchanted hideaway. That's not just scandal. That's storytelling. By mid-morning, the great hall has quieted, but the tension lingers. Eleanor has remarried, Henry has roamed, and the gossip has taken on a life of its own. Everyone knows that queens can rage, but only Eleanor seemed capable of weaponizing her fury into history itself. She had already survived one marriage annulled for lack of sons, only to turn around and produce a dynasty that would dominate England for centuries. She had ridden in the Crusades, scandalized pious monks, and locked horns with her husband in power struggles that made Game of Thrones look tame. So, when the whispers start, she poisoned her rival, she plotted against her husband, she encouraged her sons to rebel. You realize something important. In the medieval court, gossip isn't just entertainment. It's ammunition. And Eleanor knew exactly how to use it. But don't get too comfortable. Because while Eleanor raged against Henry's infidelity, another queen across the channel was sharpening her knives, metaphorically and maybe literally. Her name? Isabella of France. Her husband? Edward II of England. And her story makes Eleanor's look like a polite marital disagreement over morning porridge. So refill your ale cup, settle back on the bench, and brace yourself. Because the next scandal doesn't just end with whispered rumours, it ends with a king's downfall. By the time the sun climbs high, the great hall smells less like fresh bread and more like boiled meat. Noon means dinner, and dinner means everyone, from nobles in silks to knights with mud still clinging to their boots, crams onto benches at long trestle tables. The clatter of trenchers and spoons sets the rhythm, but the true feast isn't the food, it's the tension. You take your seat, careful to angle yourself so you can watch the high table without looking like you're watching. The king laughs too loudly at something. The queen doesn't laugh at all. Around you, men lean in, whispering between mouthfuls of pottage, and women lift goblets just slowly enough to eavesdrop. Welcome to the medieval lunchroom. Every bite of stew comes seasoned with suspicion. Across the Channel, in England, King Edward II was providing enough scandal to keep every gossip-monger in Europe employed. Edward, son of the mighty Edward I, the hammer of the Scots, the warrior king who crushed rebellions and terrified barons, was supposed to carry the torch. Instead, he carried a torch of a different kind. One that burned for his beloved companion, Piers Gaveston. From the moment Edward crowned himself king, he elevated Gaveston, showering him with titles, jewels, and affection so obvious it made the nobles choke on their venison. Gaveston wasn't just a courtier. He was the king's shadow, his confidant, and if you listened to the whispers, much, much more. One chronicler sniffed that Edward and Gaveston were inseparable. Another claimed their love was beyond all reason. Was it romantic? Was it political? Was it both? The truth hardly mattered. What mattered was that barons across England were scandalized. Imagine you're a noble, expecting the king to grant you land or titles, and instead all the rewards go to Gaveston, a man you despise for his arrogance and his influence. You wouldn't just frown into your stew, you'd plot. And plot they did. The barons eventually cornered Edward, forced him to banish Gaveston, then captured him when he returned. What followed was not just political execution, but something nastier, revenge dressed as justice. Gaveston was dragged, mocked, and finally killed, leaving Edward shattered and his nobles triumphant. But Edward never learned. Soon he replaced Gaveston with the Despensers, father and son. And if Gaveston made the barons furious, the Despensers made them murderous. Their greed, cruelty, and closeness to the king pushed England into open rebellion. And where was the Queen in all this? Sitting quietly at first. Isabella of France, daughter of Philip IV, was clever, beautiful, and politically shrewd. Married to Edward at 12, she endured years of humiliation as her husband ignored her in favour of his favourites. But Isabella was no silent, suffering wife. As the Despensers tightened their grip, Isabella's patience snapped. When Edward stripped her of lands and humiliated her publicly, she did the unthinkable. She turned on him. You overhear the whispers in the hall. The Queen has fled to France. She's gathering allies, and she's not alone. Not alone indeed. By her side stood Roger Mortimer, a handsome, ambitious nobleman who had once been Edward's enemy. The rumours about their relationship were juicy enough to stain parchment. Lovers, co-conspirators, partners in every sense. Isabella and Mortimer gathered an army, returned to England, and swept through the country with shocking ease. Edward was captured. The Despensers were executed in spectacularly brutal fashion, hanged, drawn, and quartered for the son, castrated for the father. And Isabella and Mortimer ruled in young Edward III's name. And Edward II? His end came in a cold, damp castle cell. The official story said he died quietly, but the whispers said otherwise. The most infamous rumour? That he was murdered with a red-hot poker. Chroniclers wrote it with relish, though historians still debate if it was propaganda. Either way, the gossip had already done its work. Edward's legacy was forever tied to scandal, humiliation, and a gruesome end. Pause here. Let's step back from murder and talk about manners, or the medieval lack of them. While the nobles whispered about Edward and Isabella, their hands were busy dunking hunks of bread into shared bowls of stew. Forks. Forget it. You used your knife, your spoon, or just your fingers. Napkins? Wipe your greasy hands on the tablecloth, or better yet, on the sleeve of the person next to you if you didn't like them. Meals weren't just about eating, they were theatre. Where you sat mattered more than what you ate. Being near the salt cellar, that ornate little container of precious white crystals, meant you were above the salt and important. Far away, you were practically invisible. So when Edward seated his favourites close to him in places of honour, it wasn't subtle. It screamed favouritism to every eye in the hall. Imagine being a powerful earl, shoved below the salt, watching Gaveston smirk at the high table. No wonder they sharpened their knives. While Isabella toppled her husband in England, her father, Philip IV, was busy manufacturing his own scandal in France. The Knights Templar, those legendary warrior monks with white mantles and red crosses, had grown rich and powerful from centuries of crusading. Too rich in Philip's eyes. He owed them money, and nothing fuels royal suspicion like empty coffers. So Philip launched one of the most audacious smear campaigns in history. At dinner tables across France, rumours spread. The Templars spit on the cross. They worship idols. They kiss each other. In strange places, eyebrows shot up. Goblets paused mid-air. Whether people believed it or not, the gossip was too delicious to ignore. On Friday, October 13th, 1307, Philip struck. Templars across France were arrested in a coordinated sweep. They were tortured until confessions spilled out, real, imagined, or fabricated. Bonfires lit the sky as Templars were burned alive, their reputations in ashes long before their bodies. And when the last Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, was burned, he reportedly cursed Philip and the Pope, summoning them to God's judgment within a year. Both men died soon after. Coincidence? Divine justice? Or just another rumour given the sheen of truth by repetition? Either way, Philip's scandal achieved its goal. The Templars were destroyed, their treasure seized, and his debts erased. Not bad for a king whose nickname was Philip the Fair, though his fairness stopped at the execution block. Back in the Great Hall, your stew has gone cold, but the gossip hasn't. Every story you hear makes you sit a little straighter, listen a little closer. Kings undone by their own desires, queens who turned into wolves, warrior monks toppled by whispers. You realise something. Midday isn't just about food. It's about spectacle. It's about watching who sits next to the king, who dares to laugh at his jokes, who sulks in silence. Every gesture, every glance, every raised goblet tells its own story. And as the servants clear away the trenchers, scraping grease-soaked bread into buckets for the dogs, you can't help but think, the day isn't even half over, and already reputations have been fed to the fire. But save your appetite, because if morning and midday belong to queens and kings clashing over lovers and power, the evening belongs to bedrooms, betrayals, and scandalous whispers that could topple entire dynasties. The Tour de Nesle affair, Richard the Lionheart's rumoured intimacies, King John's sleazy escapades. And trust me, when night falls in the castle, the candles don't just flicker, they burn with secrets. The sun slants low through narrow windows, setting the stone walls ablaze with gold. Servants rush to light candles. Beeswax for the high table, tallow for everyone else, their greasy smoke curling through the rafters. The hall smells of roast meat and spiced wine, but under it all lingers the sharper tang of anticipation. Evening is when the castle breathes differently. The day's business is over, prayers have been mumbled, and now it's time for the true theatre. Alliances whispered in alcoves, trysts arranged in shadowy stairwells, and rumours that taste spicier than the cinnamon sprinkled on the pudding. You sit back, watching the highborn exchange sly glances, and you realise something. Morning gossip was warm-up. Midday scandal was rehearsal. But night is when reputations live or die. The first whispers float across the hall like candle smoke. They speak of Paris, of towers, and of women who dared to defy the crown. The year was 1314, and 3 daughters-in-law of King Philip IV of France found themselves at the centre of one of the juiciest scandals in medieval history. The women, Margaret, Blanche, and Joan, were accused of adultery after being spotted in the Tour de Nesle, a riverside tower in Paris. Their alleged lovers, 2 knights, handsome brothers who should have known better than to tempt royal women. Imagine the shock. France's royal family, meant to embody chastity and virtue, suddenly tainted by whispers of affairs in secret towers. The scandal spread faster than spilled wine. People claimed the women smuggled in their lovers at night, that the knights wore their wives' gifts in public as trophies. And the punishment? Brutal. The knights were executed, flayed alive, castrated, and finally beheaded. The princesses faced imprisonment. Margaret's downfall was so complete she allegedly starved to death in captivity. Blanche spent years in confinement, while Joan managed to wriggle free through family connections. The gossip didn't just destroy reputations, it destabilized the French crown. Some even say the affair set in motion the dynastic struggles that led to the 100 Years' War, all because of whispered love affairs in a Parisian tower. So the next time you hear someone claim gossip doesn't matter. Remember, entire wars can sprout from a rumour whispered after dinner. Now, you might be wondering, how did people even manage affairs in an age of arranged marriages and watchful eyes? The answer, as always, is equal parts ingenuity and desperation. Medieval love potions were a thriving business. Some promised to inflame passion, made of herbs like mandrake or even stranger ingredients, powdered toad bones, drops of blood, bits of hair. Others promised to dampen desire, ensuring chastity by dosing someone's wine with herbs meant to cool the body. Did they work? Probably about as well as modern horoscopes, powerful because people believed in them. And contraception? Let's just say the methods were creative. Amulets, potions, fumigations, even wearing animal testicles around the neck. Doctors scribbled recipes with solemnity, while ladies whispered them like secrets. Affairs carried risks, not just of scandal, but of children. And in the medieval imagination, magic was as much a weapon as a sword. As the candles gutter, another story takes shape, this time about England's golden boy, Richard the Lionheart. Hero of the Crusades, idol of chivalric romance, the very picture of a warrior king. And yet, behind the songs and legends, rumours curled like smoke. Chroniclers noted his unusually close relationship with King Philip II of France. The 2 men dined together, slept in the same bed, and were described as inseparable. In an age when kings cemented alliances with swords and marriages, their intimacy raised eyebrows. Some later chroniclers suggested a romantic bond. Was it true? Was it political theatre? Hard to say. Sharing beds wasn't uncommon among nobles. It signified trust, and castles didn't exactly have spare guest rooms. But the persistence of the rumour tells us something important. People were watching, whispering and speculating, just as you are now. And Richard's own life added fuel. He married Berengaria of Navarre, but spent little time with her. He fathered no children. He died young, felled by a crossbow bolt during a siege, leaving behind no heirs but plenty of questions. The lesson: even the greatest warrior of Christendom couldn't escape gossip. His sword may have terrified armies, but a whisper about his private life could slice just as deep. If Richard was the lion, his brother John was the weasel. You know him already, the villain of Robin Hood tales, the king forced to sign Magna Carta after his barons rebelled. But his politics weren't the only reason the nobles hated him. John had a reputation as a womanizer of the worst sort. He didn't just chase barmaids or flirt with noble ladies. He abducted, seduced, or outright coerced the wives and daughters of his barons. Imagine being a powerful lord, only to find the king himself sniffing around your wife. It wasn't just insulting, it was dangerous. The whispers were relentless. The king took so-and-so's daughter. He dishonoured Lord Fitzwalter's wife. The list grew long enough to fuel a rebellion, and when the barons forced John to sign Magna Carta in 1215, one clause stood out. A demand that the king stop abusing his power over noble families. Think about that. The foundation of English constitutional law, the cornerstone of liberty, was born not just from taxes and war debts, but from a king's inability to keep his hands to himself. Medieval gossip didn't just ruin reputations, it reshaped governments. Let's step away from sleaze for a moment. What did evenings in a castle usually look like? After the main meal, minstrels would play, jugglers would perform, and sometimes the queen herself would lead dances. Wine flowed, dice rattled, and candles burned low. But under the music and merriment, whispers never stopped. Who danced with whom? Who slipped away early? Who flushed a little too red when the troubadour sang about secret love? All of it was noted, remembered, and retold. Entertainment was the mask. Gossip was the heartbeat. The hall grows quiet. Servants snuff candles, leaving only the soft glow of torches in the stairwells. Courtiers retreat to their chambers, some alone, some not. And behind closed doors, the night's true intrigues unfold. A princess sneaks to a forbidden rendezvous. A king signs a secret letter promising favours to a lover's family. A baron sharpens his resentment along with his dagger, muttering about how long he'll endure the humiliation. For you, the listener at the fire, it's clear. Night is when the castle's stones soak up the heat of its scandals. Tomorrow, rumours will bloom again, as fresh as morning bread. Tonight, you drift to sleep in your scratchy blanket, knowing that you're wrapped in the same darkness that once hid the greatest secrets of kings and queens. But don't drift too deeply, because while night closes the door on lust and whispers, it opens another, toward fear. Tomorrow's dawn will bring accusations of sorcery, of curses, of queens who stood trial for witchcraft. And nothing fuels gossip quite like the suggestion that magic lingers in the air. The castle settles into uneasy silence. Dogs bark faintly in the courtyard, a guard coughs on the battlements, and somewhere in the distance a church bell tolls for Compline, the night prayers. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of smoke, tallow candles guttering low. It should be peaceful. But peace doesn't linger long in a medieval court, not when the shadows stretch this deep, and not when whispers turn from affairs and lovers to something darker, witchcraft. Because lust might scandalize, but sorcery terrifies. The story that drifts through the corridors tonight belongs to Joan of Navarre. Once the Duchess of Brittany, she married Henry IV of England and became queen. She outlived him, settling into widowhood with wealth, lands, and enough influence to keep herself comfortable. But when her stepson, Henry V, took the throne, whispers began to swirl. Joan, they said, had bewitched him. She wanted control. She wanted power. And wasn't she from Brittany, that land of strange customs and shadowy forests? People muttered about spells, incantations, potions brewed in secret. The accusation was breathtaking. The Dowager Queen, charged with trying to kill her stepson using witchcraft. In reality, it was politics. Henry V needed her money to fund his campaigns in France, and accusing her of sorcery was a convenient way to seize her lands and lock her up. But for the gossips at court, the truth didn't matter. The idea of a queen dabbling in the dark arts was too irresistible to ignore. Imagine it. Joan in her chamber, candles flickering, muttering over a cauldron. Did it happen? Probably not. But the story took root, and once again, scandal became sharper than any sword. Joan spent years imprisoned, stripped of her wealth and dignity. Eventually, she was released, her reputation bruised but not destroyed. But the whispers lingered, and in the medieval mind, once someone was linked with witchcraft, the shadow never fully faded. Why did rumours of sorcery cling so tightly to powerful women? Because magic explained what people feared but couldn't understand. A queen with influence must be witchcraft. A woman who outlived her husband and kept her fortune? Surely she had the devil on speed dial. Curses were currency in gossip. A sick child, a sudden death, a failed harvest. All could be blamed on a whispered hex. And nothing spiced up the after-dinner chatter like imagining that the queen herself might have a grimoire hidden beneath her pillow. In truth, much of what passed for witchcraft was medicine, herb lore, or simply rumour weaponized. But in courts already thick with jealousy, it didn't take much to brand someone a sorceress. By now, the torches in the stairwells are burning low. The great hall lies empty, only the faint smell of grease and smoke left behind. Courtiers retreat into their chambers, bolting doors against both intruders and nightmares. You lie down on your straw mattress, cloak pulled close, and replay the day's scandals in your mind. Eleanor storming through gardens, Rosamond lost in her labyrinth, Edward II undone by love, Isabella marching back with an army and a lover, the Tour de Nail's Parisian soap opera, Richard the Lionheart's whispered intimacy, John's relentless sleaze, Joan accused of witchcraft. It's almost too much for one day. And yet, this is what medieval life was. Not endless battles or silent prayer, but rumour piled or rumour, scandal sharpened into weapons, gossip shaping the fate of kingdoms. You realize something as sleep tugs at your eyes. Gossip wasn't just entertainment in the Middle Ages. It was power. A rumour could topple a king, like Edward II. A scandal could redraw the map of Europe, like Eleanor of Aquitaine's remarriage. A whisper of infidelity could imprison a princess, like in the Tour de Nesle affair. Even the faintest hint of witchcraft could ruin a dowager queen. And the people who survived weren't always the strongest with swords, but the craftiest with whispers. So as the last candle gutters out, remember this. The medieval court wasn't all shining armour and noble quests. It was also poisoned goblets, secret gardens, forbidden lovers, and whispered curses. It was reality television, with crowns instead of microphones. And the stakes weren't just broken hearts. They were thrones, empires, and lives. If you enjoyed tonight's fireside gossip, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and ring that bell. Because trust me, this was just one day in the Middle Ages. Tomorrow we've got new rumours, new betrayals, and even juicier scandals waiting. Until then, sleep lightly. The walls have ears, and the whispers never stop.